Incredible. Well, let's get started. First of all, big thank you to everyone for being here, taking time out of your lunch break. I do see a few familiar names on the call, so thank you so much for jumping on. For anyone I haven't met before, my name is Phoebe. I'm part of the customer success team here at SightUp Pro. I'm also joined by the wonderful Tina, who will speak shortly from the Tōtika team. And so this is really a continuation from the first webinar we did with Tōtika. That initial webinar was very kind of Tōtika focused, and we had Tina and her team up and speaking about the accreditation. This time we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to lead it from more of a SightUp Pro perspective. And so we're going to spend time in a SightUp Pro account kind of just breaking down the different elements. We'll also still have a Q&A at the end. You'll get a chance to maybe ask Tina some questions and ask myself some questions about your SightUp Pro accounts or the process itself. Incredible. So I'll go ahead and I'll let Tina introduce herself if you'd like to, Tina.
Cool. Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. I'm Tina. So I'm pretty much on the end of the phone, the end of the email, and on the end of everything related to Tōtika whenever you are reaching out to us. So I look after the Tōtika program, the day-to-day operations and maintenance of everything related to Tōtika. So if you have any questions, it will normally come to me for me to answer. Yeah, that's pretty much me. And obviously, Tōtika sits under the umbrella of Trust and Construction Health and Safety New Zealand.
Amazing, incredible. And yeah, for myself, once again, I'm part of our customer success team here at SightUp Pro. And so I have worked with some of you before. I work with a lot of our customers, everything from kind of onboarding to launching and ongoing basis and support. We do also have our support team at SightUp Pro. And so if you don't have a kind of a customer success manager, I guess, that you work with on an ongoing basis, and you still have a few more questions after our session, you're very welcome to reach out to our support team as well. So we'll start off with a little quick introduction from Tina about Tōtika, and then we'll kind of jump into SightUp Pro and have a good look around.
Cool. Thanks, Phoebe. So Tōtika was set up about 5 years ago now from a demand from the construction industry mainly. With so many pre-qualification and so many requirements left, right, and center in terms of what contractors had to submit. So that's how it was created as a ultra-local, basically, centralized health and safety framework to standardize pre-qualification and connect contractors with buyers across New Zealand. So that's pretty much the spirit in which Tōtika was set up. So since then, it has grown quite a bit beyond the construction health and safety and into a lot of other industries now. And there's a lot of pre-qualification that we recognize because Tōtika is all about saving money and time to the contractors and the buyers. So pretty much it's not about putting another piece of pre-qualification that contractors need to get, but let's see what you have, and if that meet the standard, then we'll recognize it, and that's the pathway. And only if nothing meets the criteria, then we would recommend 4 companies that we moderate on a yearly basis, basically, to do the assessment for the contractors. But as of today, there's approximately 7 pre-qualification that are already recognized with Tōtika, which means that as long as people submit one of those, they'll get the Tōtika certificate straight away. So yeah, that's the whole purpose.
Incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. I think that's pretty much it, really, for the overview of Tōtika. So just clarifying, we don't do the assessment ourselves. We set the standard in, it was set up in discussion with the industry, in partnership with the industry. So it's not like we came up and we decided, oh, it's going to be all these requirements. That was really thought of, and has been a long process with the industry at the time, and it continues to evolve, and the documents are updated and as different requirements come on board. So it's a living beast. So that's
Absolutely.
pretty much it. Thanks, Phoebe.
Amazing. So I guess where does SightUp Pro fit in you know, the accreditation and in that process? What we can see is that SightUp Pro does have quite a wide span outside of stuff like your business details, your structure, the information, the initial information that you provide as part of your accreditation. SightUp Pro is really your living and breathing health and safety system. So a storage vessel for your current policies, for you to communicate with your staff, for you to manage risk forms, approaches with workers, workflows, their involvement. It's a portal that you can go back to export and provide that evidence. And so when we're looking at SightUp Pro today, we'll be looking at, yes, both features, but we'll also be looking at how you can actually export and report on your use across those different features as well. And obviously with your insurance and certificates, SightUp Pro can act as a vessel for storage and a vessel through which you can share those and make sure they're updated and you can manage them in a timely manner. So we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to jump into a SightUp Pro account now. What I've done is I've broken down 6 different areas that we'll look at. So stuff like hazards and risks, which we'll start with to begin with, engagement and communication, competency and training records, incident and near miss reporting, equipment safety and inspections. And then we'll kind of take a step back and we'll say, okay, how do we provide audit ready evidence for all of these items? Now, like I mentioned, you do have the comment section, so you can make, you can send us questions as you go. Obviously, if you do have any questions for Tina as well, we can get those. We can get those answered, and we can also look through any questions you have about the features of the platform. One last thing I will say is, as we get into these, just for the sake of time, we won't do an in-depth detailed look at the setup of each of these features. But if you do want more information or if you do want more support, please do reach out to either your customer success manager or to our support teams, and we'll be able to kind of work with you on a case-by-case basis as well. Incredible. So I'll start off with the active risk and hazard management, and let's go ahead and we'll jump into a SightUp Pro account in here. And we're going to talk about a few tools that you have within your SightUp Pro account to set this up, and then also, you know, to kind of come full circle and to report on it. And when we're looking at hazards and risks and auto control measures in SightUp Pro, the first section we want to go to, which is really the foundation of your data input, are these hazards and risks control lists within your SightUp Pro account and your action control lists as well. And so these are 2 lists that you can fully customize. When you first set up an account with us, we have a wizard that asks you a little bit about your business, and it will create a list based on your answers. But you can come into these. These are essentially longer lists of all your hazards and risks that you expect your team to see and experience on site, and also all your control measures that you know, you've approved and that they can use to tackle those risks and hazards. Now, like I mentioned, these are great foundational pieces to work within because the answers that you add in these lists come through to 2 features in the SightUp Pro system and can also be reported on quite easily. And so we have the hazard board, which we can see in the mobile. And then we also have our hazard and risk select from lists in our forms and our action control measure lists in our forms. So if we kind of step back out of this now, which is mostly about predetermining everything and setting a foundational list for yourself and your team, we can come into our forms. And within our form sections, as we're creating forms, we're able to use answer types that pull from these lists to streamline the hazards for the team and for them to be able to identify them easily, whether that's within TAs, JSAs, maybe even stuff like day-to-day restarts and bits and bobs there. So we're looking at a JSA, for example, just an example template in here. We have our identify hazard or harm, and we've used our hazards and risks select from list in here. And very similarly, we have our action control measures lists in here. And what we can see in between is we have our risk matrix. And so if we were going to open up this form in our mobile, our team would be able to pull from the list that we've added in there for them. They can outline stuff like their common hazards, so we can see how these lists come into play here. And they can analyze the risk and assess it themselves within these forms. Very similarly, we have the hazard board as well. And under the bungalow renovation site that I have in here, I can view my hazards. And whether your team is adding hazards as they go, or whether you're managing them yourself from like an admin perspective, they're able to again pull from these lists that we've predetermined. And it's that foundational work that you can do that can make the active management of the hazards and risks easier for you. And if we look at our hazard board as well from our admin console, we can see in this section that we can schedule hazards. They can be live. Maybe they're live until a specific date or live after a specific date. We can report on them in terms of who's acknowledging them. So kind of coming back to the reporting piece, and we can import them across the sites that we need them imported in. Now, from a reporting perspective, when you do use these lists, you're able to report on them efficiently, whether you're looking at your dashboard and maybe you have an analysis tab in here that pulls from your answer types in here. So we can go action, control measures, select from. We can also filter our hazards and get ourselves the data overall in terms of what trends we're seeing. And we can also use this hazards table here that pulls from our hazard board, but you'll also be able to look at all your kind of standard reporting that we'll go to in a minute. Our next topic is engagement and communication. And engagement really starts with scheduled forms. So these are scheduled to-do lists. Maybe there are ad hoc forms and there are tasks as well that can kind of move back and forth between yourself and your team. You are able to measure engagement through scoring, and you also have other ways you can engage, for example, like messages or measuring engagement through a user's individual profile and exporting that. If we start off in our form section, we have our to-do list here. And so you can set up an independent to-do list for each of your team members. If we look at our forms and we open up a form as an example, we can see that we can schedule a form if we would like to. So let's pick up pre-start in here. Here we go. And we have an example here where a daily pre-start is scheduled from 7 a.m. Monday to Saturday. And I can see that within my to-do list on this side here. So this kind of really comes down to your basic workflows with your team, your day-to-day communication. That's something that you can set in stone now. You might adjust it over a period of time, but you're kind of setting their day-to-day workflows up so that you can again come into your reporting and you can report on them and you can report on the forms that they're completing on a regular basis. One thing that's great to point out in here for anyone who's not using it is you do have user groups. And so not everyone needs to have the same to-do list within your team. So you can have different pockets of users that have different to-do lists that extend to their different roles and their different levels of engagement. Outside of forms, we also have our tasks. And so within the mobile side, you have your tasks tab in here. And within your admin console as well, you have your tasks in this section. And tasks can also be linked to a form. So whether you're sending maybe ad hoc tasks, maybe they're training tasks to your team members, or maybe you have a form that's come back to you that you'd like to add a task to. Tasks are the best spaces to have a back and forth communication with someone where you can assign them an action to do, whether that relates to maybe like a new hazard, since we were just talking about hazards, maybe a new hazard that's popped up on site. It might relate to a piece of communication, and it gives your team an avenue to report back to you how this has been resolved and provide evidence and documentation of that. You're able to come in and you can export your tasks. So download them, and you can also export all the updates that come along with them here. So all the notes that your team are adding in, any maybe documents that they're adding in for you. And if there are tasks that are assigned to a form, so maybe they've created a task within a form, that'll also be part of the form reporting. And so you're able to show the corrective action status on there and show the notes as part of that. We do also have a message function within SiteApp Pro, and so we can see it up at the very top here in our messages. Now, one thing to just kind of bear in mind if you do decide to use the message function, it's a great way of notifying your team. It essentially works as like a push notification, But what that feature doesn't have at this stage is a back and forth communication. And so what task does do very well is it gives them a space to update and complete something and action it, versus messages, which is essentially like a notification. But again, when it comes to providing like audit ready evidence, you are able to come into your My Business section, you can come into your message log, and you can provide evidence of messages being sent out to individuals, whether that's alerts of something that's just kind of come up on site. Maybe you also want to use the hazard board for that, or whether you're just really reaching out to people for like ad hoc tasks and bits and pieces like that. Competency and training records. So we do have a few different features here that you can use, and there are a few reporting forms as part of competency and training that kind of come together as well. If we begin with looking at our training forms as a great example, we have a competency register form that you may choose to use. This is a form that can essentially create a training matrix for you within the form report section. And so in this example here, I can see stuff like my site safe card type, the key roles and tasks, my training and qualifications. The key with all our training forms is that we categorize them as training in this section here. And so that what that means for us from a reporting perspective is we can go into someone's training history on their user profile, and we can filter by training forms. And then we can also in our reporting identify which are training forms and which are not training forms. And so this form will bring together a training matrix essentially for you to be able to export and use. But you can also see that we have quiz forms up at the top here. And so quiz forms, if you do decide to make a quiz form, and we'll kind of do a little bit of an example here together. A quiz form is a form that can score your team members on their answers. So you can link resources as part of a quiz. A great example is maybe you could provide like an SOP document, and you want to ask someone a series of questions after they read through the SOP document. And you can see here that you can set stuff like a passing score, randomizing answer options, allowing backwards navigation, immediate feedback, having an intro page. And what you'll notice as you set up these forms is that the form will ask you to specify the correct answer underneath. And so it will give your team member a score based on what they've answered. And again, that kind of comes full circle when we look at their training profile in just a minute. So if we pick an example here, and we go start from new, and I might use a better example, but basically what it will do is it will show them the questions one by one. They'll move through the questions one by one, and it will give them a score. Now we've looked at training category forms. So how does this actually kind of come back into your reporting, and how do you export these views? If we come into the report section, and in our form reports, this is where we can export our competency register as a training matrix form essentially. And so form reports is where you can create a report on all of your forms. When you're looking at these reporting views, the biggest thing to bear in mind is just the state range at the top right-hand side, because it can trip you up sometimes, but you'll be able to find your training form in here, view a report on that form. And so this is essentially your Excel view of questions and answers that are provided from left to right. Now, if you wanted to, you could filter the answers based on what you've given your team in the competency form, but you can also come in and export it as a live CSV file essentially. And so this would act as a dynamic training matrix. Very similarly with, for example, maybe an SOP training quiz, we have SOP training in here. We can use this similar view. We can capture signatures. And again, that kind of lends back to the communication and engagement side of things. We can capture team member signatures, and we can export this, whether you do want to export it individually for different team members, or whether you want to export views, inclusive views as well. What I often find from experience is that whilst you are exporting a view of a report, whether it's a competency training form or whether it's a different training form, you also want to come into your documents or your resources, and you want to export a view of those collective resources as well that might be assigned to different individuals. And so, for example, I have a training folder in here. in the training folder, I have a first aid folder, and I can see a few people's first aid certificates. I might also want to export this view, and this will give me a view of all this information here. And so I might, for the sake of it, say I also want the description, and maybe I want the issue date in here. And if I am using an ID number, I can pop it in there as well. And I can export this as well as a CSV file. So these can often kind of come hand in hand, and that you have a document, one spreadsheet document or CSV file that gives you that the content of a training form, and then you also have one document that gives you an overview of all the live documents that you'll store that you might not necessarily need to provide within like the accreditation process. Last but not least, on this one, we also have the team and users view. And so team and users is where you can jump in and you can actually look at an individual versus looking at your whole team. And so this can be a really, really valuable view. I can see Phoebe's profile in here, and I can come over to Phoebe's completed forms. And the key here is that I can filter by Phoebe's training forms. And so this is Phoebe's individual training history. Now we can see a few forms in here that might have a pencil icon, and this means that these forms were actually written by Phoebe, so she completed them herself. And I might also have some forms that I've been referenced in. And so say, for example, you have like a supervisor who's doing team training. He might or they might reference a few different people in the forms, and they'll link up to those profiles as well. Incredible. We'll keep going here. One thing I will mention, which is maybe a little bit cheeky on the webinar, but we are releasing a training matrix feature in October that will really bring a lot more ease to like an Excel training matrix view. So stay tuned for that, because it is coming, and it will essentially be like its own live tab, which is very exciting. Do we have a few questions? Should we have a look as we go? That shows all the workers from all the branches and the, yes, thank you so much, Wayne. So a question from Wayne here is, how do we produce a report that shows all workers from all branches and all their completed training? And so Wayne, within your org, and it might, and we can reach out to you on a case-by-case basis as well, just in case you do have maybe like a group account that you have different orgs that are a part of. If you do have a group, you will have your group reporting that also sits at a higher up level where you can come in here. But essentially what you'd be doing is you'd be coming into your reports, you'd be able to pull those individual form reports like we mentioned. But you can also, if you would like to, in the summary section in here, you have a training summary that spans all of your different forms that you can export as well. So it kind of depends on what views are important for you. If you would like a report from all the training forms, or if you would like a report from, maybe you have like that competency register form that you kind of use as your Bible and truth. And then I'd recommend exporting a form report on that specifically. Amazing. Incident and near miss reporting. So again, you know, the crux of our incident and near miss reporting really has to do with our form and our mobile button. And so within the mobile screen here, we have the report incident button. Within our forms, we're able to set up that incident form and adjust it to really fit your business and your needs and your team. But behind that form, you can set up workflows or approval settings that again lend to that communication and engagement piece, and also proving like the closing off and the review of incidents as they're coming up. In this case, what I have in here is I have an approval that's linked to this form. And so what that means, and I'm just in my advanced settings, is that when someone submits an incident, it goes to the managers for approval. Now, you might not want to use an approval setting. You might also just want to use a workflow. But once that approval is ticked off in this case, I have a workflow that sends the instant investigation to a group of investigators. And what they can do as part of that is they can view the initial incident form, and they can complete an investigation as part of that. When this comes back into my reporting, it'll give me a case number. And so if I would like to, I could set up a prefix. So I have INC in this case. You can also set up different numeric systems based on how you want the form identified. And it will give me a case within my backend reporting that I can also use to both demonstrate that workflow, but demonstrate like the closing off of that incident essentially. And if we just kind of jump into our reporting and have a look really quickly, you'll notice that you have a workflows tab. And so this is where you can find your workflows. We've had a few incident workflows that we can see in here. And if we click into them, we can see the report of the incident, and we can also see the investigation as part of that. And so this is where you have your reference number, the details from your workflow, and you can export these documents and combine them and demonstrate the communication between each of them. If you're looking to export a wider incident register, again, all this can really just be done at the click of a button. So you're coming into your form reports, you're finding your incident form in this section here. Here we go, and we can see we've had 3 incidents over the last 12 months. So we can go view report, we can view all of our cases, we can filter them, but our key here is that we want to export the evidence for auditing. So we're exporting and downloading the evidence. You may or may not also choose to summarize with AI if you're looking for further insights yourselves. But this you're probably more used for internal reporting or board reporting versus stuff like your accreditation. Another question from Wayne here. So let me just have a look. And said we can only drill down into individual worker and not in the matrix format. Yep, so our training matrix is coming in October. It's essentially going to act as a more or less a live tab within the system. And so the training matrix that you might currently be managing in like an Excel view will kind of translate within the system itself. I think, what was this first part of Dan's question? Into the matrix format. So you can both drill down to the individual workflow, but your kind of matrix format is your form reports essentially. And so this is where in your kind of 3 little dots in here, and you export this report as CSV file, that's what gives you the matrix format. And by all means, if you want to filter it before then, maybe you don't need all these columns visible. Maybe you also just want to export competency forms under a specific site, or you want to maybe search and specify a few more parameters, then you can do that before you produce that live register essentially. Equipment safety and inspections. So with the equipment side of SiteUp Pro, we have our wonderful equipment tab in here. Now this is really a live equipment register that you can use at any stage. And you can set up your own custom categories. You can set up the parameters in terms of the information you want to capture for each of those categories. And then you can come back and you can set up equipment profiles for your different bits and pieces. Now, if we look at the mobile, we'll see this reflected from the admin user perspective. And so they can view their equipment profiles as individual profiles, or they can kind of come into their categories and search. And we do also have QR codes that you can attach to pieces of equipment for your team to be able to access and engage with them on a regular basis. Now, once you have your equipment in here, and for anyone who's already using the system, you might have your profiles already. For anyone who isn't using the equipment tab, you can bulk upload your equipment in here and use our CSV template. But once you have everything in here, what you can do is you can start setting up tasks, whether these are maintenance cycles, maybe they're like road user charges, maybe they're servicing, maybe they're oil changes, and you can come in and you can create tasks that track those different cycles. These tasks could be based on readings, so it could be based on like an odometer or hours in use. It could also be based on moving dates that are updated. Maybe you have like a WAF expiry date in there. And so you can set the parameters by which they kind of repeat, and you can also select the individuals that need to receive them, or maybe you have a maintenance team as well. Now, with all these tasks, the cycles, of course, are captured in the system. You can also attach forms to these tasks as well. And so if we kind of do a quick example, and maybe we'll say like this is like a test and tag task, potentially, we can come and we can assign it to a group of users. Maybe it's our equipment management user group. We can set up our scheduling in here. And so let's pick pick a piece of equipment for ourselves. Here we go. And you can also set these up in bulk as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be around, doing this individually. But we can see a few parameters that I have here for my equipment. Now, if this was a vehicle, I'd also have my odometer pop up in here. For the case of the exercise, we just kind of pick a date and we'll say, okay, we're going to do the test and tagging every 6 months on the 1st of the month. And you can kind of see how your cycle comes into play here. And then you're also able to ask your team to fill in a form via a resource or upload a file as part of this task. And so if you are picking for them to fill in a form, which I do kind of widely recommend for your consistent tasks, because that then still produces a form report for you. And so if you're thinking about stuff like regular servicing and maintenance, there are questions and checks that your maintenance team or your equipment manager goes through to check that piece of equipment. And what's great about connecting a form to this is that you will be able to also export a form report alongside a report of your different tasks, essentially. Amazing. Equipment tasks behave the same as corrective action or training tasks behave. They appear in that person's to-do list. You can set them to be available before a certain time. And say for auditing purposes, if I did want to come in and maybe I wanted to, export all my hazard inspections that I've done over the last 6 months, I could come into my task list. I could use my filters to bring this to kind of bring this all together. So completed, we'll say inspection. And then we might also say that we want to filter by maybe the word harness. And I'd be able to view all of my tasks in this section here. And we'll use the examples we have in here. I could add extra columns in here, or I could remove columns as I would need to. I could export the updated or this list of tasks, and we're missing a few extra boxes in here, but obviously stuff like your description, your status, your notes will be updated in a normal account. And then you can also come into a form report, and maybe you have a report that goes through your harness inspections where you have a supervisor who's ticked off every harness, who's signed off on that, and who's provided the details of the inspection. Incredible. And then last but not least, we've spoken about the reports consistently as we've kind of been looking at these different systems and the different features. I will just jump into them individually once more really, really quickly. And so our dashboard, we have a lot of visual reporting on our dashboard when it comes to, like applying for accreditations. You might come in here, and we talked a little bit about proving user engagement. You might want to come in here and look at your engagement score and exporting that. You might also, want to come in here and grab visual evidence of different bits and pieces, but most of your in-depth reporting is exported from the Reports tab. We have looked at the analysis section, which I think, would be great for you to explore. But again, for most of your, although you can visualize it as a table if you'd like to, for most of your exportable data-based evidence, you'll probably be spending more time in the report section. But this is great so that you do know that it's here. Reports, your key areas here are your form reports, which you can create a report on your different types of forms. This is where really you're able to kind of to provide that longer list of audit-ready evidence, and whether you would like to also use the AI form summary as part of that, then you're very, very welcome to. And then last but not least, we mentioned communication. And so within your My Business, this is where you'll be able to see all your message logs. And so if you do ever need to provide evidence of external communication or kind of going back and forth, you are able to come in here and you can see stuff like document review. So these are emails that have gone out to different recipients, notifications, and similarly, if you come into your area for hazards, for example, you can export the acknowledgement, the list of active hazards, your kind of current setup that you have within there. So if we go bungalow renovation, we can view our hazards, we can view their acknowledgements, and we can export this evidence. Incredible. So that is, we've covered up quite a bit. And so I'm sure there will be some questions that have kind of popped up. I do have some that have come up that we can kind of have a look at as well. So let me just see. But yes, as I mentioned, we didn't, we haven't spent a whole amount of time in going in depth with features. So if there are feature-based questions, I'm very happy to kind of touch on those as well. A quick question for Tina, actually. We've had, what is the most common factor that trips contractors up during the assessment when it comes to records they do or don't have, from your perspective?
I kind of would not be able to really answer that, given that we don't do the assessment ourselves, so I don't have the visibility of what trips can't really. So I guess the best piece of advice that I could give you then is to look at the core assessment criteria.
Yeah.
And from your own perspective, see where yourself, your kind of trip, and where it would be difficult for you to kind of get evidence there.
Yeah.
I guess the feedback that we have is, for contractors that start their business the first year, for example, there are a lot of things that they wouldn't have, like evidence of, things that have gone wrong and how they put that in perspective, basically. So, of course, when those type of things show, the contractor would not be penalized. It's just where they're at that point of time. So exactly. So all of this is taken into account in the assessment. But first point of call would be look at the core assessment criteria, see yourself where you trip, and most likely it would probably be where other contractors would trip as well. That's the best piece of advice that I would give. Or otherwise, if you're going through a member scheme to do an assessment, you could ask them that question. They'd be able to answer that, no problem.
Yeah, I think my biggest piece that I have with customers is the proving of the communication part of things. During your initial onboarding, whether you're working with us or whether you're setting up your account, you'll have your policies in there, for example, but then how do you prove the layer of proof around the communication and the engagement with those policies? And so I think what is important when you're thinking about your account is not necessarily looking at, we've looked at a lot of wonderful features today, but kind of looking further and understanding the workflows behind those features and how the reporting appears in the back end. And so in the example of, having a policy and you're proving that the policy is live and is abided by, you might have a policy and then you might want to have like a training form or a sign-off form that links that policy in there, and then you're showcasing how it's used. Or maybe if there is a policy that's not necessarily something that you would have like a training form on, maybe it's about making sure that your form aligns with the policy that's behind that process. And so in the case of the incident, you might have a workflow map that talks about the ways you manage an incident within your company internally. You'll want to make sure that you have the answers within the form that reflect that policy, and also that maybe you have the workflow in that case that reflects that kind of communication. So I guess from a Sign Up Pro perspective, my best advice would be to look at workflows. Features are amazing. If you have a good idea of the features and how they work, that's incredible. But also being able to understand how those workflows actually translate and how you can prove like communication and engagement above those kind of features in themselves. Do we have any more questions? I'll just check the chat as well as we go. By all means, we've talked about quite a bit, so if anyone wants to kind of take a moment just to think. Let me see. So I've got a question here about resources, essentially, and I think this is probably a great segue because we were talking about policies before, and then having a look at how to make sure help keep workers in check to make sure all policies all resources are filled out in time and correctly. Okay, so with our resources, this is actually great to point out. Within a team member's individual profile, they can view and they can complete resources as they go. And so in Phoebe's case, I've just clicked on her profile from my phone, and I can see that she's completed several different resources relating to equipment plant training. But this is where your team is able to, if you have, for example, a series of SOPs, view the SOPs as documents and complete them as also as part of their training history. And so if I come over to my SOPs, I might have a series of SOPs in here. If I view the SOPs, my user will then be able to go ahead and mark them as complete. And so that's something else that kind of comes into play with their training profile themselves. And so if I come into Phoebe's training profile now, here we go. We saw her completed forms before, but we can also see her completed resources. And so what I often find when I speak to customers about training is that you might be pulling from a few different areas of the platform depending on what you need, but being able to allowing the team to complete resources as well, whether you want to prompt that or schedule that for a form or a training task is up to you, but you will also have that history there for yourselves. Amazing. I don't think we have any more questions, but thank you so much for jumping on, everyone. I hope it was worthwhile. And you'll still get a chance to have your lunch. We have just dropped in Tina's details if you have any more follow-up questions for Tōtika specifically. Otherwise, within all of your accounts as well, you do have the support page in here and you can reach out to us directly. We have a lot of great content in here, but if you would also like to email support, we can get you in touch with either your CSM or in touch with our team to kind of run through anything specifically. Keep an eye out for our new updates. Our training matrix in October will be incredible. And so really excited for you to all kind of make use of that and start exploring those new features as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks, Tina. Thank you, everyone.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.